I've been meaning to make this video for a while, and I'm happy to finally get to deliver. All about the best controller for the Nintendo Switch, with 6 controllers tested into different categories or genres. I'm going to introduce every controller and then go ahead and test them out individually to tell you how they fare in each scenario. So which one is going to be best for you? Which one's going to be the best controller for your Nintendo Switch? Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. For more content, do make sure to subscribe to this channel because we upload fairly often and focus on all sorts of tech products. So do make sure to leave us a like and comment any of your thoughts down below while you're at it. It really helps us with the algorithm. And if you want to support us further, then we've actually got a Patreon open, which offers early access to content and special insight to projects that I'm always working on in case that is something that interests you. So links to everything down below. So let's begin with the tried and true controller, the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. This controller released back in 2017, and it has been one of the top options, if not the top one, for the Nintendo Switch. Chances are that you probably have this controller because it is a very solid controller, without a doubt. It's got off-axis analog sticks that feel great, has all of the features of the Joy-Cons like HD Rumble and the ability to use amiibos with it, and so much more. This controller looks great, very comfortable to use, and has great battery life with fantastic feedback as well. It also has a D-pad, which is actually one of the reasons that I would argue that people ended up opting in for this. I will say this now, that if you want an all-in-one controller that offers everything that you need on the Switch, then this already wins, but not in terms of performance, as I will be explaining pretty soon. So this controller usually retails for around $70, but you can find it for $60, which is what I usually see it for. Next up is going to be a much smaller controller, and that's going to be the 8BitDo SN30 Pro. This controller is just a bit larger than the original Super Nintendo's controller, and it does lack grips, HD Rumble, amiibo functionality, and a headphone jack. But this controller has a great portable form factor, great symmetrical analog sticks, and fantastic buttons and triggers. Now, the D-pad is also one of my favorites out there, and this is the controller that I use the most because I play a lot of turn-based games, and this controller is going to be perfect for just that. And it's super affordable at around $45, I would say, so it's worth every single penny in my opinion. And I think that everyone is going to have a good time using this controller for a good chunk of genres. So this is yet another controller from 8BitDo, but with a more natural form factor, and this is the SN30 Pro Plus. This controller resembles the Pro controller the most in its design, but I would say that this controller is more for people who prefer a DualSense controller instead of an Xbox layout, generally speaking at least. This controller has a fantastic grip with great buttons and thumbsticks. The shoulder buttons are also top class for the price range, and we even get remappable buttons on the back in case you like having that kind of thing, but to me, it's not really a necessity or really that useful because of the kinds of games that I play. Now this one tends to retail for about $50, and just like the previous one, it is worth every penny. Now next up is going to be the PB Tales controller, which is a very different departure from the rest of these controllers. It's got the smallest one with buttons that resemble those on the Joy-Cons, so it will feel a lot at home for those who prefer to play in handheld mode with your Joy-Con. This controller is also very friendly for those who travel, and it's a very stylish controller. It's got the kind of shoulder bumps that you would find in many retro handhelds in order to make this as small as possible, but the buttons are really more on the mushy side of things, and they are very small too. This controller is more for people like me who have small hands, and not really so much for the people with larger or even average sized hands. But if you want a controller for portability, then this is one of the first ones that I would think of, and I did travel with it for some time. This one retails for about $40. And next up is going to be the GameSir T4 Mini. So there is a larger version of this controller available, but I wanted to talk about the mini model. This controller is way better than it has any right to be. It feels great in spite of the size, which makes it very comfortable for people of most hand sizes, and it has this gritty texture to it with some grips around the back that add to that comfort aspect. These also have RGB lights that make it ideal to use this controller during the nighttime. It works very nicely, and the thumbsticks are pretty large and comfortable, same as the buttons, even if the D-pad is lacking due to how imprecise it can be at times. This controller retails for about $30, and I would consider it to be a great value. I used to have issues with it when it came to drifting, but that hasn't been the case so much as of lately, so I would say that things should be mostly alright there. And the final controller on this list is going to be the PowerA Fusion Pro controller. This is a true pro grade controller that definitely fits that bill. It's got fantastic rubber grips around the back, and you will even find some additional metal buttons that can be remapped as well. There are going to be mode switchers over here, so you can use it with your Switch on PC and platforms of the like. And there's just no going around it really. This controller is very comfortable, and I really like it for every game, honestly. And it has a great D-pad, fantastic thumbsticks, and it's a very solid controller overall. This is one of my favorite ones for sure, but not the one that I would recommend outright because it has an off-axis controller scheme and it retails for about $100, which I do believe is still worth it if you do want a pro controller for your Switch, but I have seen it for as low as $60, which at that point it is an absolute steal, totally worth it. Now let's go ahead and talk about the gaming performance on two different genres of games, since we can surmise quite a bit from doing these two particular games. So we're going to test out an action title where almost every button but the D-pad will be used, and a turn-based game where the D-pad will be used heavily and the other buttons will still have some utility in that regard. So we're going to talk about Dragon Ball Z Kakarot for the action game and Shin Megami Tensei 5 for the turn-based game of choice here. So let's begin with Dragon Ball Z. And we are going in order of pricing here when it comes to these controllers. So from cheapest to the most expensive of the bunch. Every controller delivered on an enjoyable experience with this game to some degree. I tried out one of the toughest boss battles with each one in order to be able to deliver on the most challenging scenario for this genre. Everything but the D-pad will be taken into consideration here, and well, let's get right into it. So the cheapest controller, the GameSir T4 Mini, delivered on a fantastic gaming experience, and this is mostly because of the thumbstick size. I was very comfortable gaming with it since the battle got pretty intense at times, and I would grip the controller even harder. It was always comfortable to use, and I especially enjoyed the precision of the thumbsticks here. And I would say that everything from the shape to the faster triggers on this device helped quite a lot here. And if there was anything that I thought that got in the way of my gaming experience, it was just the minor drifting that I still experienced, but this was actually a pretty good controller nonetheless, and it didn't happen very often. It only happens mostly when you're just further away. But just as I said in my full review, this controller is really good for the price, and I think that it's a fantastic option for action games without a doubt. Now next up is going to be the PB Tails controller, which utterly disappointed me in this regard. This is because this controller felt way too cramped, but the way that the triggers are stacked were also the biggest inconvenience in this particular genre. The triggers will feel great, but the position made me press the wrong button many times, and these triggers are required to have a proper gaming experience in this game. So the position really met with the gameplay this time around, but the face buttons felt mostly fine, and the analog sticks, if I'm honest, were a little bit too thin for my liking here. Like again, these are the same ones that you would find on Joy-Con. So I would not really recommend getting this controller for action titles like this, but I know that this isn't really a blanket statement that can be applied to any and every action title. But because of how Kakarot in particular plays, this controller did fail me here. But it does way better in the next category. And then we have the 8BitDo SN30 Pro controller. This controller also feels a bit too small for this genre of games, especially due to the lack of a proper grip, but this controller does very well in just about every other genre, every other way. Like, this is just a very compact way of playing games, and it does have taller sticks. It's got full-size button. It's just got everything going for it for something that is so small overall. I sincerely enjoyed the experience here because it just felt so natural to pick up and play, and even though it will sometimes get cramped a little bit, I thought that it was still mostly fine for action games, but I much prefer it for turn-based games. However, the quality of the hardware here is very difficult to dispute, and I think that many of you will love this controller even for action titles. But I would recommend the 8BitDo SN30 Pro Plus instead, because this controller does everything that the SN30 Pro does, but even better. It's got proper grips, a more reasonable gap between the thumbsticks, and even better triggers. You do also get those additional buttons on the back if you want to use them, so don't really worry because you will get a lot of benefits from switching over to this controller. So what can I say? It's just a very solid experience, and I probably felt closest to my most productive gameplay session, I want to say. Like, this controller is really, really good. So the Nintendo Switch Pro controller was easily up there too. Just on par, if anything. Now, the only big difference here is really going to be the positioning of the sticks, which is strongly going to be depending on your preference anyway. I personally prefer symmetrical sticks, so I wasn't as big on these, but still loved my time with these. The Switch controller has high quality triggers, bumpers, nice buttons, and much more. Now, this controller, as I've been saying, is a very complete one and offers a fantastic experience when gaming in just about any genre, with action titles being a great example of just that. Lastly, the PowerA Fusion controller is easily the most powerful option here. Thanks to the amazing grips, I felt like I was at my best using this controller. But don't get me wrong, my favorite controller in this category was actually the SN30 Pro Plus controller, because it's just so nice. It's just so natural to use. At least that's how it feels. And this controller from PowerA right here could very well be considered to be over the top. But make no mistake, this controller is extremely premium. Feels extremely premium when using it for gaming. And if you wanted a Pro controller specifically for the Nintendo Switch, then this is exactly the controller that you're looking for. Trust me. And now back to the turn-based games, where the D-pad will be required here, and actually I will only dedicate this section to talking about the D-pad, since it's important for knowing whether or not you've got a good D-pad for your controller. So the GameSir T4 Mini isn't really very good here, because while it does have a fantastic shape and size for this type of genre, the D-pad is pretty mushy and imprecise. It's just way too wide in the center, which makes it so that my inputs are always inaccurate, and I end up turning it to the side by accident. This is a pretty big deal if you needed a controller for its D-pad, because while everything else about this controller is fantastic, the D-pad could use a lot of work in being a better one that allows for greater precision. And the same can be said about the PB Tails controller in terms of the mushiness, but the shape does lend itself better for precision and to getting more accurate inputs. Because of the overall size of this device, I find it to be very pleasant for turn-based games and more relaxed play sessions, which makes me prefer it over the GameSir T4. However, if they had given us a bigger D-pad, this controller would be so much better for this genre overall. I would say that there are definitely some missed opportunities with this controller. Now, the 8BitDo SN30 Pro is the controller that I use the most when daily driving it on the go, so I definitely have a pretty soft spot for this controller after all. But the D-pad just felt so precise when selecting the different menu elements and choosing your attack. It was just so easy to work with, and the size definitely helped make this a fantastic controller for just a more relaxed genre such as this one. I love it. So the SN30 Pro Plus was slightly worse because of the size, as it seemed just a little bit overkill, but it also has a fantastic D-pad that offers a lot of precision in games like this, and I really enjoy using it. 8BitDo just has a very solid controller, and I can very much appreciate what they have done here to both of the models that I'm showing off today. Very responsive, awesome controllers. The Nintendo Switch Pro controller, in my opinion, has one of the worst D-pads out there, because it's far too stiff. I don't like using it for platformers or much that requires split-second decisions when it comes to the D-pad, because I feel like it really just gets in the way. I feel like it's not responding in time. So just as before, I'm not really a fan of this controller's D-pad, and while literally everything else about it is so great, I find it very surprising that this is the one that performs so poorly here. It's just uncomfortable to use, honestly, when it comes to turn-based games. And lastly, the PowerA Fusion controller. This one is way overkill for this genre of games without a doubt, but the D-pad is still very good. It's not super clicky, it's more so like on the mushy side, but it still feels pretty solid, and I genuinely enjoy using it here. For many genres, this controller very fantastic with its D-pad, and it's just a very strong competitor against any other controller that I mentioned on this list. But that price. In conclusion, I think that it's time that we picked a winner. So between all of the options here, I wouldn't get the PB Tails controller, because probably it's just a bit underwhelming for everything that you get for just about $40. I would only get it for certain genres of games, but that's when I would probably recommend the 8BitDo SN30 Pro controller instead. It's just as portable and had much better button/analog sticks. It's just what it is in that regard, and I use this controller every day. This is not the best controller either, though. The Nintendo Switch Pro controller is still the safest bet for getting a very solid controller, and it is the only one that features amiibo functionality functionality in HD Rumble, then this is the option to get if this is what you're looking for. However, the best controller for gaming on the Switch is obviously the PowerA Fusion controller because it feels like an all-in-one solution that covers all grounds. This controller is fantastic for any and all genres while featuring things like a headphone jack, which can come in handy, as well as remappable buttons and the best grips in the industry. But the SM30 Pro Plus is the best choice for the Nintendo Switch. Gyro, haptics, battery, the hardware, just everything about it is so good. Hits the nail right on the head, and it's just so well balanced that I can't ignore it for just $50. I absolutely love this controller, and I think that this is the #1 controller that you should go for. On the lowest end, I would recommend the GameSir T4 Mini because this is also such a fantastic controller, and it's smaller too, which makes it great for portability and while having big buttons and analog sticks for genuine play. So that's been my verdict here. That has been quite a lot, so I do apologize. So thank you so much for watching this video up until the very end. I do very, very much appreciate it. So tomorrow I will be releasing a video on the best Joy-Cons for the Nintendo Switch, so if you are interested in that, do make sure to subscribe to the channel because my foot just fell asleep. And yeah, that is a good reason to do it. Also, I would love to just mention that all of these controllers are going to be linked down below in the description. These are all affiliate links, so if you end up clicking on any of them, then we do get a small commission that does help out the channel quite a bit, and it helps us make more videos just like this as well. So links to that down below. There's also a Patreon. And by the way, I would love to thank every Patreon, which we're going to be beginning with the tier 3s being Aaliyah, Sada, Wazel, and Omar. Thank you so much for all of your support because it really does go a long way. Now, on to the rest of the patrons, which you should be seeing on screen. Those are going to be the tier 2s. Thank you so much for everything, guys. You have made everything so great. And thanks to you, we can continue to make content like this. But yeah, with that said, this has been Francisco from Tech Summit. Thank you for watching, and I will be seeing you all later. Enjoy.